Project 3 Engineering Disasters Team 84. I'm Emily. I did my disaster on the Ford Pinto. Company Ford came out with a new line of cars called the Ford Pinto in the early 1970s. This car was relatively cheap, which resulted into many people buying them. But unfortunately, the Pinto had a design flaw where the rear end, when the Pinto was rear-ended, the gas tank would explode due to it being behind the rear axle, resulting in the car catching on fire and injuring lots of people and having many deaths. Again, the results of this disaster were fatal crashes, injuries, about 180 deaths. The Ford did recall the Pinto and tried to fix the fuel tank with a stronger metal. Unfortunately, it didn't work as well, and it resulted in them having millions of dollars lost due to lawsuits of injured customers. The Ford Pinto disaster relates to Ened due to the breakdown of the design process.
Hi, I'm Hannah Liebman, and I researched the Johnstown flood disaster that occurred on May 31st, 1889. Basically, what happened was the South Fork Dam broke after several days of extremely heavy rainfall, and the water that rushed out of the dam flooded a nearby town, Johnstown, and killed 2,209 people and caused a lot of property damage. It's sometimes referred to as the worst man made disaster prior to September 11th, 2001. The cause of this disaster was mainly related to the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, which owned the dam. And these were rich hunting and fishing people who did not really know how to engineer things. So they poorly maintained the dam, lowering the flood bank by 3 feet and building a mesh that was smaller to keep the fish in, but it ended up compromising the safety of the dam. They mainly did this because they wanted to profit from the dam. And this disaster was investigated by the American Society of Civil Engineers, but the report that they created was not released, and they did not blame the hunting club, which in the end, the investigation was reopened in 2016, and the fact that the hunting club did lower the flood bank, um, the club's fault was confirmed. And basically, this was an Ened engineering code of ethics breakdown because first, the hunting and fishing club did not perform their services only in their area of competence, which is one of the code of ethics. And on the side of the American Society of Civil Engineers, they did not issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner.
Hi, I am Ben Roberts, and I researched the disaster known as the Space Shuttle Columbia. On February 1st, when the Space Shuttle re-entered the atmosphere, a small hole that was created during launch got filled with hot air, which melted structural components, causing it to fall apart on re-entry, killing the entire crew. So how this relates to Ened is there was a massive breakdown in testing and in manufacturing. The big orange propellant tank that carried the fuel had foam that fell off and broke the wing. And when that was investigated, the higher end people of NASA who owned the shuttle blew it off as not a big deal because the insulation tiles did have fallen off before and have not damaged. They decided not to make these insulation tiles stronger because it'd be too expensive.
Hey, my name is Garrett. I researched the Chernobyl reactor meltdown. I'm sure you all are probably at least somewhat familiar with Chernobyl, but basically, in April of 1986, the reactor in the Chernobyl power plant in Ukraine melted down and exploded. It didn't kill that many people initially, but due to the radiation leak, there's going to be probably a total of somewhere in the hundreds to thousands of people that will eventually die from radiation or cancer due to radiation. And it also brought a kind of stigma to nuclear power that is still prevalent to this day. So what exactly happened? They were trying to perform a test to see whether the reactor could run if the actual power supply to the building was cut. But the plant operators were not too familiar with it, and they violated some of the protocols that the reactor had in place to keep it from melting down. The reactor surged. They tried to fix it by inserting control rods, and that caused it to melt down and explode. So essentially, there was a few different reasons that came together to kind of form a perfect storm for this to happen. So first of all, the operators were not trained properly. They didn't know how the plant worked. They didn't know what they were doing. This led to them violating protocols that were in place to keep the plant from, melting down. The designers of the plant didn't go through the design process fully. They didn't test the reactor as it should have been, and there was flaws that came up on that day that caused it to explode. And then after the fact, there's ethics violations and cover-ups. The Soviet Union did not want to look bad, so they kind of downplayed the disaster. They covered up the true effects of it.
So we have seen many different similarities between all of these, but the three big ones that we've noticed that appeared in all four disasters were it'd be too expensive to fix. There were always design flaws in each disaster, and there were always human casualties. When I researched the space shuttle, I noticed that they said the main reason why they didn't improve the insulation tiles on the bottom of the shuttle is because the cost would be so great. They did not believe that that cost would be worth it.
So while we thought that the disasters were probably more similar than they were different, one of the main areas that we noticed a lot of differences in was the actual scope of the disaster. So for example, the space shuttle had a few casualties, just the people on board, while the Chernobyl disaster affected a large portion of Europe and had a negative effect on a lot of people that were not really involved with the disaster at all. Another thing, the flaws are not always apparent. You have to actually go out and look for them.
What we learned, as engineers, we've learned that we need to prioritize safety above all else. We need to test all aspects of the design thoroughly. We need to bring up concerns to our superior until they listen and leave a healthy margin of error. For example, in the Ford disaster, Ford fully knew of the issue of the Pinto, but decided to release the car even though basically to save money.
Building off of Emily, we will definitely apply what we learned to our careers. For example, being an environmental engineer, I'll have to build water management systems like the dam, and I will make sure to have a large margin of error when it comes to something that could potentially affect a lot of people. I think all of us in our careers would rather fail in testing and not in practice. And also, will stop poor products from hitting the market. Here are our sources, and thank you for watching this presentation. Please contact us at these emails if you have any questions.